Hey guys, welcome back to another video. We have another customer snowblower in here today. This is a 3-stage, so it's got 2 impellers in the front or in the middle and augers on the outside. Well, these tend to just hammer through big snow drifts. This is quite a big machine. It's 30 inches wide. It's got a 420cc engine on it, and I imagine this one moves some snow. Got a few concerns on this one. Customers telling me that the pull cord is something wrong with it. Well, yep. Cord's frayed and it won't retract, so we're going to get into that and fix it. Probably restring it. The steering control cables are broken. So I've priced those out already for them, and we're going to go ahead and get those ordered up. They should be here in a few days. We'll get that taken care of. While it's here, I'm going to go over it. I'm going to do a tune-up, oil change. We'll flip it on its nose. We'll take the belly pan off and we'll look at the drive and clean up the shaft and make sure that everything's greased and moving properly in there. He did complain that it's actually quite difficult to move the gear shifter on this one, so it's likely the slide, the shaft that the friction pulley rides on is probably either rusty or greasy, or too thick of a grease on it, or not enough grease. Something's going on in there. Anyways, this is his main machine. He uses it a lot, gets a lot of hours. So we'll get into it, and I'll probably pull the bowl off the carburetor and have a quick peek in there too. Alright, we'll get you set in the stand. We'll get some tools ready here, and we'll dive in. I've already done a few things. I've drained most of the fuel out of the tank, so when I flip it on its nose, it's not going to leak everywhere. I've already loosened and tilted the drift cutters back so they're not going to get hung up when I lay it on the floor on its nose. So I have gone over a few little things, lubricated here and there, so I'm not going to get every little detail on this video, but we're getting into the major stuff. Hang tight, we'll be back in a sec. Okay, so the customer gave us the go-ahead to order those cables and replace them for the steers. To replace those cables, typically what would happen would be you would pull the bolt out of the center, you'd slide the wheel off, and you'd gain access to this assembly in behind the wheel. Unfortunately, the situation with this blower is I don't think these wheels have ever been off. So they are seized onto that shaft, and I don't want to get into any extraordinary measures getting those off. Sometimes you can heat them up real hot with a torch. You have to heat this side of the hub, then you have to go to the inside and heat this part of the hub, and a lot of beating and pulling and carrying on and cursing. I don't think we want to get that far. Fortunately, from in behind the wheel, I can get this piece off. It's just 4 screws, 1 in each corner, and then this piece will wiggle out from where it sits, and flipping it over we can see the cable. That's the cable we got to change in there. Z bend on this end. It just travels up and just hooks in with a barrel on this side. So I think the cable's broken somewhere in this area here. This machine gets pulled around on the back of a truck, so there's a carrier in the back of the trailer hitch of the truck. So in the winter time, this unit gets a lot of salt, road spray. So it's quite rusty. The shifting issue is definitely dried up old thick heavy grease on here. We're going to clean that up. We're going to lube all the pivots where everything pivots. Inside here, these are the dogs that engage and disengage for the steering. We're going to clean the old grease off of here, and we're going to lubricate this with some dry lithium. Dry lithium doesn't get stiffer when it's cold. It won't freeze. So that's good that way. The machine has had quite a bit of use. This machine is used commercially, so even there's movement in the bushings. Oh, camera's actually picking that up. Bushings are tired. I don't think we're going to get into everything in like that on this machine. We're just going to give her a once over and go from there. We're going to clean this disc up. That's our drive wheel. That's our friction disc. And we clean all that stuff up and make it run and shift and act like new. Very, very rusty. That belly pan just about folded up like tinfoil when I took it off. It's very thin. I don't know how many years we got left in this machine, but we're going to give it as many as we can. Alright, let's, I'm going to regroup, get you in the stand this time, and see what we do. Might just pull this off first. I've got penetrating oil on the attaching hardware for that recoil starter. We might pull that off and have a look-see in there and rewind it. But we'll find out. Hang on. Well, here's where we are with the recoil starter. 3 little tiny bolts hold that thing on. But this is so rusty that those 2 came out with some penetrating oil on it. And this one just wouldn't come out. It was supposed to be 8mm or 5/16. It was rotted down. I tried to tap on a 9/32 or 7mm. It was too big, so I took a zip cut and I just cut a slot in it. And I tried to put a screwdriver in there, and there's no way that was going to turn. So I ended up using my impact driver. Still didn't turn. So I had to put some heat on it. I actually had to heat that thing with a torch and use the impact driver to get that little bolt out of there. I probably have one similar in stock. I'll pop that back in there for him. But at least we can get to where we need to be inside the recoil starter. Oh, the first impact driver bit I used actually broke. That's how tight that thing was. And it came up and it hit me right in the safety glasses. So it's a good thing I had them on. Anyways, so what I've done is I pulled the cord all the way out. So right now the cord, there's no loops on the pulley. It's just straight in there now. It's nice before the cord is actually broken. You can see that this one's all frayed. But before the cord actually breaks, if you catch it, you know exactly how much cord you need to put back in, and it's already pre-wound. So all I've done is I pulled it all the way out, and I used just a zip tie here to secure the pulley so the spring can't rewind it. You can use a zip tie, you can use vice grips here, you can use a number of different things, whatever you want to do. You can do it, if you want to do everything one-handed, you can hold it with one thumb and put all the cable in there if you want. That works too, but zip tie is nice and easy and quick. So I'm just going to snip the end of this off, and I've got some of this heavy pull cord in bulk, so on a large spool. I'm just going to measure out what I took off. I'm going to just melt the end a little bit. I'm going to feed the new cord in there and just let it rewrap itself and go from there. So I'll be right back with the new cord on here. Hang on. Alright, so we got our new cord here. Just going to warm up the end. Bring it down to a point. It's nylon or a plasticky type of substance, so it melts pretty easy. Just don't want it to fray. That'll prevent that from happening. So we'll slide it back in through the D handle here. A nice tight knot in it. I like to grab the end with this end, little end with pliers. Give it a good pull, make sure it's nice and tight. Tilt you up a little bit, maybe a little easier. There we go. That's good and tight. That's not going anywhere. Might even be able to get it tucked down back into that handle. Yeah, somewhat. Oh, beauty. Pull right down in. Nice. So we still have an open-ended rope here. Warm up this end. The Zippo's getting a little low on gas, so warm up this end. Careful, if you warm it a lot, it gets real hot. That'll be nice. And like I was explaining, our pulley spring, the recoil spring, is already under tension. It's under the proper tension for what it's going to need. So we'll just thread it through the outside of the housing, thread it through the hole, put another knot on the inside here. And then that is one recoil fixed. Good and tight. Make sure everything's tucked down in there. Looks good. We'll cut that zip tie, hang on to the pulley, cut the zip tie. And this should be able to recoil back into place. Come on, get my fingers in there. There we go. There we go. Fixed. That's all good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that bolt out of here, and I'm going to, it's not that, it's 10 millimeter. Put a little bit of lube on the underneath that pulley. Right down inside there. Just a little penetrant oil, a little light lube. You don't want grease in there because grease hardens up over time. A drop of lube in there for the dogs. Ooh, that's not a drop, that's a lot. That should do nicely. Just a little bit of lube, give it a little help. Check to make sure the dogs are working. Nice. Perfect. It's going to be just fine. Moving on. Alright, I'm trying to get lighting in there good enough for you guys to see. It's kind of dark, but the issue we're having, increased effort to shift, especially in the reverse. That's because this shaft has got old, clumpy, hardened up grease on it. It's dried out. We're going to have to clean that off. And we'll put some lithium grease on there. Lithium grease doesn't get sluggish and hard in cold weather, so lithium is the best thing to do. Best thing to use for this. Unfortunately, I've got this plate off, so the that shaft is not supported very well, so it's hard to show, but that would be your high gear. Let me get my hand in there to support that. And your low gear is going to be down. Neutral will be right in the center of that disc, and reverse will be to the right of center. That's your high gear. Neutral's in the middle and reverse is there. Some machines have one speed in reverse, so it'll be over a little bit. Some have two speeds, so you have two different selections. You can go fast or slow in reverse, but it doesn't matter. It's, 2 speeds is probably still slow. In any case, we are going to clean that off. I'm going to use some penetrating oil. Yeah, use some penetrating oil on a rag. We'll wipe that off. We'll put some lithium on it, and then I'll move that friction disc over, and we'll get the other side of the shaft. It's a hexagonal shaft, so that allows that friction pulley to slide, so change positions. However, it still allows it to drive the shaft. Could have been hex. They're usually hex. That's all I've ever seen is hex ones. I mean, it could have been square, but hex is probably better. There's a reason they use it. I'm sure somebody tried to square at one point. So that's just normal penetrating oil. Usually works pretty good for taking grease off. Brake clean is another good choice that it works too. I have this in my hand. That's what we're going to use. That's over on our reverse speed now. Clean all the old lumpy grease out of there. Now let's get some lithium grease on there. We're going to use that same rag with some actual brake clean, not penetrating oil, and we're going to wipe this down and get that cleaned up. I don't need a lot, just enough to cover it to prevent rust. That's it. There was a tiny little dab on my finger. That's all you need. I'll flip it over the other side and I'll show you how much. Back up to high gear. And that shaft is hanging us up, I think. Yep, there we go. That much. That's all you really need. Might actually be too much. Whatever you do, you don't want to put too much on there. It'll drip off or get flung off and hit that friction disc, and then your snowblower won't drive anymore. Won't move on its own. And it ain't no fun to try and push snowblowers through snow. There's that done. Grab a can of brake clean here somewhere. And we'll just going to spray it on a rag. It's easier to control where it's going. We're just going to wipe that until all the black is gone. A little bit of water in here too from it dripping down through the systems. That side's nice and clean. Move it over, back into the reverse mode. And we'll clean the other side of the disc. The drive wheel. That's good. Find a little bit of brake clean on here that isn't full of crud. We'll just give that friction wheel a bit of a wipe. Make sure there's no grease on it. Nice. Beautiful. That'll work just fine. And we don't need to do too much in there. I'm going to hold a rag underneath things because I want to spray this pivot point here. That's the shaft, that's the gear selector shaft pivots in there, so put a little more on the top where the shaft goes through the body of the machine. It's going to be hard to judge if it's much better because I can't really operate it properly with the shaft flopping around like that. But I didn't get any on that drive wheel, so that's alright. Oh, that's far easier already. Even with the shaft flopping around. That's all we really need to do in here. I mean, I could put a small amount of grease on the drive wheels. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Doesn't need much, just a tiny bit. It's metal on metal, so you should put something in there. Just a little tiny wipe of lithium on there. A lot of grease in here is not good. Tiny little bit. You can also use chain lube for chainsaws. Well, chainsaw bar oil, I should say. Chain lube for motorcycles, dirt bikes, stuff like that. That'll work too. These are idlers on the shaft. They do spin independently of the shaft. They're nice and free. There's no crunchiness. I'm not going to risk getting lube on the wheel. So that is that. I've got penetrating oil up here. These two bolts here on this bracket. You would loosen these bolts and adjust the bracket up or down to adjust the tension on your, that's the drive handle. This cable is very loose. So you would loosen the bolts and slide, on this case, you would loosen the bolts and slide the bracket down, and that will tighten up that slack in there. Give a little more drive. In essence, that's how that works. when you, well, excuse the fact that that's flopping around, but when you pull the drive lever down, it lifts this metal pulley onto the rubber one. The metal pulley is spinning at engine speed. Well, it's belt driven from the engine, but it's spinning from the engine. This is stationary when the snowblower is not moving. So this spinning, you pull the handle down and it lifts that disc up to contact the rubber wheel, and that drives this shaft, which in turn drives your axle. Alright, I'm going to put the belly pan back on, I think, and then put the blower back down. I'm still waiting for cables. We're going to get into checking it over for tune-up, and we're going to pull the carb bowl off and have a gander in there. Alright, so here's where we are with this. I didn't put the belly pan back on there because we're going to need to get in there and align that shaft with the friction wheel on it to get these caps back on. So this is the left side one. It's pretty rusty in there. What I did was I unhooked the spring from the housing, I slid the dog off, I cleaned the shaft that that pivot's on, and I just put some lithium in there, and I decided to put lithium on there on these ones. There's a couple of different designs. This is one type. Another type is a set of collars, and they mesh independently like this. And when you pull a cable, they separate, and it allows them to rotate individually. And then when you release the cable, the spring pops them back together, and then they'll slip into place and then start to drive the wheel again. That style is good. They're both good, but the style with the multiple fingers, they tend to get bound up and they don't like to release so easy. Those ones I'll use lithium, or not lithium, I'll use spray graphite on there. It sprays on out of a spray can wet, and then the solvent dries up and leaves a dry graphite on there. So these are fine with lithium, so we'll do the same thing here. I cut the cable off because I got to replace them both, so I just cut it off with a pair of side cutters. Now we can get them out of the housing here. We get the cable out. A couple of little dogs to squish together. Let's see if they want to come out. The last one I just ripped it out. There we go, that's out. Easy enough. Carefully pull the cable in. It's rusty and very pointy. You don't want to be poking rusty metal into your fingers. This is a Z bend on this end. That should slide up enough to clear. Okay, that's just a Z bend. That's easy enough. A little bit of rust on the shaft there. So we'll slide the spring into the slot, and that way we can release the spring, keeping in mind which position the spring, which hole it's on. A little bit of rust in there. Looks like bronze. Dump out the crud. Let's get some lithium on there. A little pivot. Metal on metal needs some type of lubricant. And in this case, more than a lubricant, it needs some type of rust preventative in this particular machine. White. It does sit flat. This edge sits flat on that pivot, so I'll just put a little dab of grease in there too. My own machine is a Husqvarna, and it has the multiple collet type drives. And I've gone through this on my own too to make sure that everything is lubricated, and it works a lot better. I got the machine in nearly new condition. It hadn't been used very much. There was no rust on my drive system or the steering system. There was no rust anywhere, but it was still very difficult to disengage. I'd pull the levers and they would have to snap out of their position. So I took it apart and I looked, and it wasn't rusty, but it was dry. There was no grease in it at all. So I sprayed mine with graphite, and it seemed to work really good. You don't need much of this stuff, just a little bit. You don't want it to get everywhere. want it to be able to engage and disengage easily. That one's ready to go. So on the axle, on the hexagonal shaft that drives, that's on the friction wheel, there's big cogs at the end, just outside of the housing behind the tire. And when you pull a cable, or sort of the big cogs have teeth in them all the way around, and that's what drives this being engaged. What drives the wheel? When you pull a cable, it disengages that from the big cog, and it prevents this wheel from driving, which means the opposite wheel is driving. So say this is the right hand housing. If you pull a cable on the right hand wheel, it disengages the drive for this wheel and makes the left wheel drive, turning the snowblower to the right, or making it easier to. I don't use it much on mine, actually. It's it's a nice feature, but the nicest thing about it is when you're at the end of your driveway and you get out there, if you just grab both steering cables and pull them both together, it completely disengages the drive of the snowblower. It makes it much easier to just pull it backwards, just to back it up. There's no drag on anything. It just makes it easier. Well, these are in nice shape now. Everything's working, everything's moving good. There's a bearing that sits in here, in this housing. It supports the end of that hexagonal shaft. Just get a little bit of grease in there. I think that's that. I've already gone ahead and pulled the fuel bowl off. This was a running machine. There was no issues with that. It was running just fine. Actually, he was using it the morning he dropped it off. So, but the pull cord wasn't working. So he would strategically start it at the first stop on his route, and then just leave it running until he got to the end and shut it off. But this thing's got a massive fuel tank on it too. But there was no issue with the carburetor. I wanted to make sure that there was no junk laying on the bottom, and when I got the bowl off, there was some rust in there. But being that the tire was not able to be removed, I couldn't get all of us in there, so I just went ahead and did that. Okay, now I'm gonna leave the belly pan off. I'll drop the snowblower back onto its wheels, and I'll start looking at oil change and that stuff. We'll get that going. We'll get you repositioned. Hang on. Before we get on to the oil change there, I just wanted to adjust this cable. I touched base on it earlier with these two bolts. See, the bracket is in a slotted bracket, and this cable is quite floppy. So to adjust that, it's quite simple. You just loosen these two bolts, and as you slide the bracket down, it tightens that cable up. That's a little too snug. You want just a little bit of slack in it. Otherwise you'll overstress that cable. A little bit more. That's probably about good. Just enough to let it wiggle a little, so you can see how much we've moved it. That's a 3/8 head. So that's how much we've moved the bracket to adjust the cable. So I'm just going to snug it down from there, and then I'll tilt the snowblower down and carry on. Alright, so we're over here at the auger belt idler pulley. There's a bit of slack in that belt. I checked him out. He'll be okay until next season. Next season we'll put a set of belts on there, but I wanted to move this pulley over just to get a little more tension on that belt when the lever was pressed. But man, that thing was so rotten and so tight, I had to put a torch on that nut just to get it to crack loose. It was tight. I'm going to let that cool down maybe a little bit. Nah, it should be alright. We'll take it off, we'll slide the bolt out, and I'll show you the adjustment there. Alright, so like in the last video, the other machine that he brought to me, I'm going to move that over. It's a 2-position hole. Some of them are slotted up here, but this is just a 2-position. You can actually see that it looks like kind of like a figure 8. There's bumps in the middle, so you have to remove the bolt, move it over to the other hole, and push it back in. It's still quite warm, but we're gonna get that done. Since I had to heat that nut up, it's a nylock nut, so it's got a ring of nylon in there to keep it secure. Since I had to heat it up, that nylon's no good anymore, so it's not self-locking anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'll put that's a flange nut. So I'm going to put a washer and a new nylock nut on there, and that'll make sure it stays secure. You don't need to watch me do that. I'll pop the bolt in there, pop the idler back on, and get her tightened up. Okay, that's back in working order. While it was off, I checked the bearing in there. It's nice and free. It's not noisy. That's snugged up nice and tight. I've lubed the pivot on that arm down below there, way down in there. I lubed that pivot and made sure that I had to twist this just a little bit, the support. I had to twist it to make sure that it, see if I can get a nice straight shot on it. There we go. So that pulley is now straight. It's in line with the belt. Originally it was actually a little bit crooked, so it would have been wearing the back of the belt a little. Nice and tight now. A lot more tension. Where's the pick? There. A lot more tension on the back of the belt. It was flopping before, so that'll be good. Next year when we change these belts out, I'm sure I'll have to move that idler pulley back over where it was. Same with this other machine, but that's the job for next year. So at this point now, I'm going to put a little more gas back into the tank. I'm going to run it till it's warm, and we'll dump the oil out and give her an oil change. There we go. She runs like a champ. Got the doors open. We'll let that air out a little bit. It's getting pretty cold in here pretty quick, so we'll let her air out, and we're gonna get the drain pan over here. So I just ran it until I could feel the engine crankcase was warm with the back of my hand. So that's enough. It'll let it flow, let the oil flow out a little better. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna lift the front of the blower up a little bit. I'll just kick this little piece of 2x4 underneath it, tilt the engine back towards the drain. That way I make sure I get all of it out and I'll let it drip out. So we'll put some 5W30 in it. That's what this one calls for. 5W30. And that's what we'll put in. We'll get that drain and we'll see what color it is. Well, let's see what we got. That's pretty black. It was due. Definitely due. That's old oil. That's pretty liquidy. The engine is not smoking hot. It's just warm. So yeah, it was due. All right, we'll let that drain out. Let it drip for a while. I'm not in a rush. We'll top her up with 5W30, and then this one's just about ready to go. Alright guys, it's been a couple of days. I had to wait for these cables to come in. Let's finish this one off. This is the two steering cables. So this end here goes up on the lever, and the Z-bend end goes down in the actuator for the wheel. So I'm just going to pop the top one in there because it's real quick and easy. It just slides right in. Perfect. It just slips in there. And the bottom, let's see if we can see what we're looking at here. Let's get you a little closer. So the bottom here, the cable has to pull this arm, pull it that way. So we'll get her fed in there. You know what? I would have been smarter to do it the other way. Let me get it back off of the handle. That way it'll give me some slack down to the bottom, and it'll go in that piece easier. So we're going to feed it through, and it snaps in. There we go. So it pushes into the housing. This end here, I'm going to put some pressure on this to give us room. We'll just hook the Z into the appropriate hole. These are on the bench. Yeah, it's pretty hard to do out here. See, maybe with the spring off. We'll just unhook the spring here. It'll take all the tension off that arm for me. Holding onto the cable and the housing and the spring and everything. There we go. That might be a little easier now. That Z-bend's got to go in there. Almost. Almost. Alright, I got to do it on the bench. Okay, now it's hooked up. I just slid the whole thing off of the post, disconnected the spring, slid this off the post, hooked the cable in, slid everything back together, and hooked the spring back on. So now that all I have to do is center this over the hub, pull a little tension on this, and it'll slide onto the gear, and then I can put the 3 bolts back in that secure it. We'll move on to the other side. I'll get this one on, and I'll show you the finished product, and then we'll move to the other side. Alright, so we're just going to pop this back in here. This is the big gear down here that I need to get located properly. That one down there. These teeth here engage in the dog on the actuators. So this has already got some lithium grease in there. That's all good to go. So we'll just slide it over the end of the shaft. Give the cable a pull, and that'll allow it to slide onto that cog better. There we go, that's on. Now it's just a matter of getting everything set back in properly. We'll get the screws in it. Well, that's set where it needs to be. I'm just going to put the 3 screws in it now. It's releasing properly. I'll show you how that functions once I get everything all bolted together and supported. Okay, now we'll do the same thing on this side. We got our new cable. And our random parts. This little 1/4 drive air ratchet comes in real handy down in there because it takes a long time to do that with a wrench. Too long. Too long. Okay, so this is greased up, good to go. Now that I've figured out the trick, I'll probably show you right on camera easier. So we need to get this Z bend into that hole. So what we'll do is just a little farther away, that way hopefully I'll stay on camera. So what we're going to do is we are going to insert the Z bend, push the cable, it's got little retainers, push the cable in. We will unhook the spring from its holder. We can then lift that whole unit off, get our cable hooked up the way it needs to be, slide it back on, and you can see that slot, so the spring end is to come through that slot and hook into the hole like that. There we go, that side's done. So what we'll do is up at the handle, let me see if I can get you zoomed in there and I'll see what we can see. Should be pretty good there. So this end, the barrel end, needs to go in here and then flip down. So in order to do that, I have to push against that, pull against that spring, so the cable end sticks out. Then I can get it hooked in there in the handle. Maybe. Two hands. Hooked in. And then it pops into its holder. That's it. Now we can see here what that cable does. So when you pull the cable, it opens that dog. Disconnects. So this is the right side cable on the right side assembly. When you open that, it disconnects the drive from the right side wheel, meaning only the left wheel is driving, and it tends to move the snowblower to the right. So get the zoom back out. Whoa, that was fast. Easy now, don't get seasick. That's the gear that this needs to engage and disengage on. So I have to pull the cable to move this out of the way, and I'll be able to slide it on the end of the shaft, and then we get it secured. There we go, that's on. Run the bolts in, and we're done. Oop, I kicked the camera. So we can see what's going on in here. Friction wheel with both cables out, released. The friction wheel drives this axle, drives a gear on either side. Those two gears drive these two gears, and it's basically a solid axle. There's no differential in there. I'm going to pull the right side cable. I'm going to pull the handle. It's going to disconnect this gear. It's going to disconnect this gear from the wheel. Now you can see there's a little drag, but this freewheels this side. That's that. Just pulling this cable disconnects this wheel. The drive only drives the right side, or the left side wheel, makes the snowblower turn to the right. Last thing to do is the belly pan. And this one is done. I mentioned before, this is a customer snowblower. He's actually going to be here today to have something else looked at in front of his plow truck, and I figured since I got the cables this morning from my supplier, perfect time, opportunity, you can pick this snowblower up and we'll put it right back into service. Thanks for joining me, guys. It's been an interesting video. This poor old machine's in tough shape from all the salt and use that it gets, but it's used commercially, so that's what you get. Until the next time, thank you for joining me. Please don't forget to click the thumbs up button. I like likes. Subscribe if you haven't, and if you do decide to click that subscribe button, don't forget to also click the bell icon to notify you when I get new uploads ready for you. Cub Cadet. Nice machine. Take care, guys.